everybody, this is Chris Jerome with the Radical Independent, and I'm here with James Etzkorn, Independent for Washington's 1st Congressional District. James, thanks for talking with me today.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So, first of all, I'm totally impressed with the number of independents running this year in 2026. They're not fringe or outside of the normal sort of two-party like you would sometimes see in the past. Just in terms of strong, reasonable, quality independence, it's amazing, and I'm glad you're here to talk with me. But before we dig into your campaign, can you give us a little background about yourself?
Absolutely. So, born and raised Washington State. I went up to University of Washington in Seattle to get my bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. I then went on to get a master's in nanotechnology. Spent over a decade working in the tech field as a hardware engineer, both a manager and an engineer. So I spent some time at Google, spent some time at IonQ, making quantum computers of all things. That's over in Bothell in my district. I have over 50 patents, and at a
Hmm.
certain time, I'm just there's this nagging voice like, what if I'm working on the wrong problem? I just see our country, our society slowly unraveling. I put a lot of the blame on Congress just being afraid of doing their job because they're too busy or too focused on just protecting their own and getting reelected that they forget their constitutional duty of checks and balances. This is why we see such a ballooning of the executive branch. And overall, I'm just incredibly frustrated with the way things are going. And so I sat down and said, okay, what would I do differently? How would I solve this problem? And that's ultimately how I landed on being independent, because the whole system has perverse incentives to maintain the money, maintain the influence that the people are just no longer represented. And the only way to have a government by the people, for the people, is to be independent. That way I can represent my constituents, not answer to party bosses, not answer to the donors,
Yeah.
not answer to special interests. So I'm sure we'll go more into my platform on how I plan to do that, but ultimately that was my journey. And I am on the school board. I forgot to mention that. So I'm very passionate about education and I'm looking for more impact. And I think that has to be done at the federal level.
Yeah. Well, you're talking my language here with basically a broken system and finding yourself to be, independent is the only reasonable and functional way forward. So where's District 1 in Washington?
Yeah, District 1 is just east of Seattle, so we're about a half hour east. It consists of, Bellevue, Redmond,
Hmm.
Kirkland, Bothell, Woodinville, Snohomish. So we have a huge tech hub, but then we also have a large, more rural, suburban community. Think of like east of Everett, we have a lot of Boeing workers, of course, some farming, and a lot of commuters. So it's a very diverse district, and I can very much, of course, relate to this district. Being born and raised in Washington, having that tech background, I feel that I am a good fit to represent the people here.
Right, right. A lot of us can agree the two-party system's failing miserably, and we need more pragmatic, solutions-oriented, independent-minded representatives, right, to break the partisan gridlock. So let's get into some of your key issues. What are you basically running on?
Yeah, as a whole, Americans, we have lost faith in the future. We see our government just being sluggish, ineffective, inefficient,
Oh yeah.
that we no longer, and again, speaking very generally, we no longer feel like the future is getting better. Cost of living has been crushing us for decades and wages have been stagnant. So how do we fix this? And that's ultimately where I sat down as like, we need a strong working class for the economy to progress, for America to thrive. And it starts with government. I am fighting for a more efficient, focused government. This means simplifying the process, stripping out the bureaucracy. I'm not talking about, cutting regulations or just willy-nilly cutting programs and see what breaks like Doge did. I'm talking about diving into the weeds, like
Right.
why does it take 3 years to do an environmental study? Why is it a 100-page application process to get this certain funding? It's like these programs, these grants are designed to be so complicated that you require a consultant, you require a lawyer just to figure it out. So one example that I go dive deep into is the low income housing tax credit program that has been championed by Susan Del Bene, who I'm challenging. It's a program where it allocates tax credits for builders of low income housing. On the surface, sounds great. But you dive into the weeds and you're like, oh, okay, a builder can't use tax credits to build housing, therefore they need to sell it. Well, in order to sell it, they need to find a banker and a syndicator. And then they need to apply for it. Then they need to go to this committee that reviews the application and they rate you based on if you're going to build charging stations or if you're going to put solar panels on the roof. And it's like all of these steps. It's just so complex, unnecessarily complex, that by the time shovel hits the dirt, 20% of our tax dollars are gone. Now, I want to build more housing. That's a big part of my plan. I just want a more efficient, focused government. I want to actually measure programs. Are they working? What are we measuring to know if they are working? That's my engineering mindset that I want to bring. I'm not a politician, and I'm very frustrated with career politicians that see a problem, throw money at it, and then walk away and like, oh, job's done. And as we see, like we have homelessness on the rise. We have our environmental programs that are just not having the impact that they are promised, especially here in Washington State. So I'm all about tracking metrics, holding groups and teams accountability, and especially setting incentives to outcomes that benefit the people. So what do I mean by that? Congress controls the power of the purse, and that means, setting funding or allocating funding to certain programs. And you could set incentives by setting requirements for that funding to get done. So if we want to attack the high prices, this affordability crisis that we're going through. I mentioned housing. We can unlock grants for municipalities and cities to, for example, change their zoning restrictions in certain areas so more housing can be available. We can have low interest loans for qualified builders to attach. Healthcare. Healthcare, we pay twice as much as any developed nation in the world. We are so bogged down by
Right.
administrative costs and just complexity that we can simplify the process. The federal government can solve this by funding more doctors each year. There's a federal residency cap that hasn't been changed since 1997, where the actual number of doctors that they fund each year is capped.
Hmm.
We have hospitals have monopolies that they're the only ones allowed to operate in a certain area. I'm all about increasing options, increasing supply, both housing, healthcare, and energy, and that's going to put downward pressure on prices. Other side of the coin is wages. I mentioned wages have been stagnant. So how do we get more high-paying jobs here in America? So we are in a technology boom. There's hundreds of billions of dollars being invested into infrastructure. So I think we need to harness this investment. Let's say, okay, you're building a data center, you need to build your own power plant. So much like a developer coming in, buying a 1950s home, and they require, before they can put up a townhome or some kind of condo, they're required to add a sidewalk, update the
Yeah.
sewer line,
Yeah.
upgrade the local infrastructure. Let's do the same thing. Let's harness this money being spent on data centers and critical and to enable critical infrastructure. Sorry. And then we can feed that power back into the grid, lower people's energy costs, and low energy plus a focused government setting the correct incentives, we can attract advanced manufacturing. Think of like electric vehicles, satellites, drones. These are high energy intensive manufacturing processes. And when we build and attract those companies, we build here in America, we generate more careers. Like a good example that I point to is right here in Redmond, both SpaceX and Amazon build their satellites here. And so what happened? We had 90 support companies spawn around them. So now we have this whole ecosystem of expertise from workers to machinists to, supply chains, all right here. So if you want to go build satellites, well, guess what? You're going to come here. And that is great for the local economy. It's great for the tax base. It's great for the restaurants. It's great for the car mechanics. Like, I'm a big fan of this rising tide raises all ships. And if we have a focused government making smart investments in infrastructure, workforce training, and incentivizing advanced manufacturing to come here in the United States, companies compete for our labor and our wages go up like we saw in 2021. That is the most effective way to increase wages is to increase demand. I don't think, coming in with a heavy-handed government approach is a long-term viable option. I mean, this is what we've seen. We've seen companies leaving America, and that's not what we want. We need more jobs, more well-paying jobs to get out of this service-based economy, return to a nation that builds, and really establish these critical careers that we need to thrive.
Yeah, and you kind of bring up two of the big fundamental issues. One is the bureaucratic aspect and how it's just a nightmare that takes years, which means it takes more dollars. We it's hard to do great things anymore as a country. You look at some of these other developing countries and they're doing kind of what we used to do. The biggest dams, the tallest buildings, this, that, they're growing, they're expanding.
100%.
Yeah, and so we've kind of created this bureaucratic maze that's just total nightmare. But at the same time, you have the dysfunctional
100%.
legislature where it's not solutions oriented, the incentives are broken, and there's no real reason to try to fix any of this stuff because it's all political theater, right? They're not concentrating on solutions or actually legislative accomplishments. It's a team sport game. So we take our eye off the prize in that respect when by going down these wedge issue diversions while systemically we're just breaking.
Absolutely. Our government is more focused on stopping bad things from happening than making good things a reality. Like there's no plan. There's no vision of the future. Did you know, like China has a 100-year plan. We don't even have a 5-year plan. And they're able to execute at a much faster pace. They're completing the project while we are still reviewing the permit. Now, I'm not saying, I want to turn America into China. I'm
Right.
saying, like, we need to light a fire under our butts and kind of move with intention, move with a focus. Like, what are we doing here? And
Yeah.
and to your point, it didn't used to be like this. When the Soviet Union launched the Sputnik satellite, Americans and politicians didn't use this as fodder to attack the other side. We came together. Eisenhower passed an enormous funding bill to invest in education, to invest in American innovation. And then 10 years later, we won the space race.
Yeah.
This is what we need to do. We need our Sputnik moment where we actually rally together on a focused goal and execute. And I am not running on any wedge issues. I'm running on solutions. I designed my platform to focus on where Americans agree because we need to show that government can actually get things done, that we can actually improve people's lives. This will restore people's faith in the future because, as I mentioned, I think people are losing that confidence. And this is how we see a rise in more and more extreme politics and more extreme rhetoric because people are just like, this isn't working. Well, let's go over here and try this, or let's go over here and try that. And that's not the game I want to be playing. I want to say we have problems. We need to make the necessary investments, and I'm very confident in the American innovation that we can solve this. We just need to get out of this blame game, get out of this finger pointing, and the best way to do that is to change who we're sending to Congress. Let's
Right.
get rid of the career politicians. Let's get independent-minded problem solvers to go in there, dive into the weeds, and actually work on solutions.
Yeah. The way it's supposed to be, deliberative. And it's amazing what
Yeah,
we can accomplish when we work together. I mean, it's incredible what we're losing out on in terms of efficiency and competency with what we have. It's such a tragedy. So what are some of the problems and obstacles that you've encountered kind of running as an independent? I like to ask that because it's obviously an uphill battle. So was ballot access an issue? Are there other kind of, obviously money's an issue because you're going against groups that have deep pockets, probably, if they're a duopoly and infrastructure. So talk a little bit about that.
definitely. Just that the infrastructure that you mentioned is lacking. Like there's certain apps or programs available, like they have their own data sets. Like, oh, you can use this, but you must be running as a Republican, or you can use this, but you must be running as a Democrat. And there's very few that are open for anybody to use. They
Mm,
are out there. A good party is a great source for the independents out there. They have a lot of data available, and you have to, declare that you are running as an independent. So I'd highly recommend them. The other thing that, I find that's challenging is that independent is kind of an unknown. And so people kind of assume the worst or they fear the worst.
Yeah.
So I live in a very Democratic left-leaning district. So I'm saying I'm running as independent. So immediately, of course, it's, oh, you're just a closet Republican. Oh, you know Republicans can't win. That's why you're independent. It's like, no, no, I'm frustrated with both parties, et cetera, et cetera. Then I talk to people that are in a very right district, and they get the attack from the other side. Oh, you're just a closet Democrat.
Yeah.
And it's hard to break through to people that I truly am trying to fight, the good fight, so to speak. And I'm not, a Trojan horse or their worst fears that they're actually going to vote for something that they don't want. I'm not running to step on anybody's rights. I'm not here
Yeah.
to, try to cater or I'm not owned by some big billionaire donor or something. Like it's without that brand behind me that people recognize, I feel like I need to explain every single wedge issue. Like, where do you stand on this? Where do you stand on that? Where do you stand on this? I'm just like, I'm trying to
Right.
focus on solutions here
That's a huge
for these
obstacle.
systemic problems.
Yeah, the political culture, we've just socialized to think in terms of the simplistic binary, you're this or that, and that's kind of our shortcut, right? So it is a disadvantage as an independent to get your message out there's all kinds of independents, right? And then, like you said, there's a lot of suspicion, which is really unfortunate. But
Yeah, I just want to
you
put
get,
one point on that. But
yeah,
45% of Americans now identify as independent. There is a big movement, and there is efforts across many groups to build that brand. And I think that's really going to help. As we have a brand to attach our names to, or at least some brand that says, we support this independent, then people once they recognize that brand, they're like, okay, my fears are reduced, and now I can actually look at their policies, look at their proposed solutions without worrying about they're having an extreme opinion on a social issue, for example.
right. You have a deadline coming up though, in this primary that you're in.
So actually, to get on the ballot in Washington State, it's either you raise, I think it's 1% of the position's salary in dollars, or you get that number of votes. So since I'm running for the U.S. House, I had the application fee was 1% of the annual salary, which of course, is a good deal of money. So it's like
Yeah.
about $1,700, but it's not insurmountable. So
Right.
it was, compared to other places, other states, it was relatively easy to get on the ballot, but
Good.
we are a top two primary,
Mm,
meaning regardless of everybody is on the primary, regardless of political affiliation, and the top two move on, whoever gets the most votes. So the primary ballots are due August 4th by 8 p.m., which is, next week. So there's a lot going on, of course,
right.
but I really am having a lot of fun, getting out, talking to voters. That people are hungry for something else. I'm out there handing out flyers, and I basically say, I'm independent. I'm frustrated with the two-party system. I'm fighting for solutions, and I barely get that far. They're like, "Yep, me too. I'm frustrated too. I'll take one."
Yeah,
And
yeah.
'cause, I have like this whole spiel plan, and I barely get three sentences in, and people are like, "Yep, I'm frustrated." And a poll just came out where in my district, 78% of the people are unhappy with congressional leadership.
Hmm.
That is insane. It's like, okay, we all, the vast majority of us want something different. So let's, try something different. Because I'm running against Susan Del Bene. She's the chair of the DCCC and represented this district for 14 years. And it's like, I just want the conversation I'm having with people is like, this is not working. I mean, all we hear from her is, Republican, 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 Trump, Trump, Trump. And it's like this is obviously not working. We need to try something different. Let's actually have representation instead of someone that just, runs to the party demands or whatever the party says, or is fighting for party power. Like we need to just change the conversation, focus on solutions, follow the data, and let's actually start making some significant changes here.
So, do you support any sort of election reforms? That's a big part of the radical independent. I talk about all the little systemic tweaks that we should try to do. I'm all about free, fair, and competitive elections and dismantling the outsized power of a corrupt rigged duopoly. But things like term limits or campaign finance or ranked choice voting, the primaries in a lot of states are all very distorting, and of course, most of the time, independents can't vote in them. And what is that part in any way of kind of what you promote or support?
Absolutely. I mean, definitely, I put the top at term limits. We have politics and politicians have made a career out of this. Like,
Oh yeah.
I believe public service should be a duty, not a career. It should be a rotation. We should have professionals going in as like, oh, I'm gonna go do my 2 years in government, to help out. And that just it brings new ideas. It brings best practices from industry. Anyone who has had the pleasure of working with government, it's like some archaic form or some archaic. I was like, what are you guys doing? Why are you doing it this way?
Right.
We use this program and we do it like this. It's way faster if you do it like this. And we just need more people kind of doing their part, so to speak, pitching
Right.
in, and then going back to the professional world. It shouldn't be like, I want to be here for 30 years or 20 years
Yeah.
and because it just incentivizes doing whatever it takes to get reelected. And
Yeah. Permanent campaign. Yeah.
yeah, that's what our current system is like. So definitely term limits. You mentioned campaign financing. Absolutely. I want to get in the dark money that's in politics. We need to bring it back to the people. There's a lot of ideas out there. I want to have this discussion. I want to have these debates. I want to actually enact reform. You mentioned, ranked choice voting. Love it. If we can have three, four, five people get through the primary, and then we have a ranked choice voting in the general, it would open up the door. People are so afraid, the spoiler effect. Oh, if I vote independent,
Right.
then this person that I don't want is gonna be elected. And funny enough, this is like the only thing the two parties can agree on. They're like, we don't
Right.
want a third competition because this is how they raise money. This is how they run. It's like this person's bad,
Yeah.
this person's evil, vote for me. And
Yeah.
that's all
The
we
whole
hear.
lesser evil.
Yeah,
We're
it's
we're
like,
trapped in
okay,
that doom
well,
loop. Yeah.
what is your solutions? What is your vision for the future? And that's another argument I'm making to the voters here in Washington's first district is, the Democrats are not going to unseat their 14-year incumbent. This is a left-leaning district, so a Republican can't win in the general. If you want to actually hear Susan DelBene's defense of her policies, of her solutions, her vision of the future, vote independent in the primary so we can have that debate. She can't then go on and just to attack me based on party because
Yeah.
I'm not running as a party. We
Right.
can actually have that debate, talk about solutions, and then the voters will have the information they need for the general. So I'm asking people for a vote in the primary, then you can make up your mind in the general.
Yeah, and I like how detailed your site is there's several issues. They're almost like little case studies where you break down sort of the problem and the solution, and it's just a lot more detailed. Usually on a lot of pages, it's just very vague rhetoric, and but there's some you kind of get into it a little bit there, and that's
Yeah,
kind of
and I
refreshing.
appreciate that. That's kind of the engineer in me. Of course, I knew, when creating that, when writing that, I'm like, barely anybody's going to read this, but I want this to be my foundation piece. And I didn't want to just be another politician that's just like, oh, I want to make everything better and make lives better. I want to say, no, here's a
Yeah.
problem. This is why it's failing. Here's what I do differently, and just
Hmm.
really, to your point, I do a case study. I mentioned the low-income housing. I dive into healthcare. I talk about I call it this economic flywheel. This focused government investment creates more jobs, which raises the tax base, which gives more funding to make those critical investments. And this is how we, get things going instead of just, raise taxes and give benefits. It's not having the effect, the long-term effect is not, the trend line is not good. Let me just put it that way. And we need to try something different.
Right. You also have sort of a rubric of I come from an education background and it's but kind of using data to make the decisions and focus on the outcomes. So you have that 5 step, what's the problem? What evidence do we have to support the solution? What metrics are we going to be tracking? It's very sort of outlined. And it's similar in some ways to education when you're looking at, what's the objective? How are we going to test to know if they're getting it? What are we going to do with the ones that aren't getting it? What are we going to do with the ones that, you know what I mean? It's kind of step by step. And so that aspect kind of resonated with me a little bit as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, ultimately, it's the scientific method. You make a hypothesis, you test it, either you perform measurements or you look at the data, then you move on down the line and then you iterate and then
Right.
finally, work towards a solution. Yeah, I am very data driven. I don't want to just go out here and make my opinion about this or opinion about that. I'm gonna say, what does the data say? What do the studies say? What has worked before? And most importantly, don't make decisions just for the next election cycle. Make
Yeah.
decisions for the
Well,
next 50
yeah.
years, the next 100 years.
Yeah.
Like this is the 250th anniversary of America. I'm running because I want to see it thrive for 250 more.
I really appreciate your core values as well: liberty, accountability, and stewardship. Obviously, liberty, kind of the bedrock. Accountability, which I don't know how much we have of that in government, really, basically, and then stewardship, just taking care of what we got and being efficient. And I like the core values a lot.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight stewardship. Stewardship is two parts. It's both, as you mentioned, taking care of what we got. That means taking care of the environment. We
Yeah,
can have economic growth without destroying our waterways and forests. And it's stewardship of our tax dollars. Like I mentioned, it's not just throwing money at problems, it's walking away. It's like, what is the most effective method to solve this problem? How do we know it's working? How can we be more efficient, more focused? And this is how I plan to do my part to help government run, like a well-oiled machine. We
yeah,
see in industries, I have all these incentives in place, and it's produces a much better product in the end. Whereas government, we don't have those same incentives. So that's why I'm very focused on this incentive-based structure. It's human nature to respond to incentives. And we have a lot of incentives in our government right now, but sadly they're incentivizing the wrong thing. They're incentivizing like how can I make the most money off the government, or how can I stay in office the longest, or how can I convince people to vote for me? And then, as I mentioned all down the line, you have consultants and lawyers and people just trying to take their piece for every little program, or certain people in leadership positions. They create little funding buckets for their friends and or their friends who run a company doing X, Y, and Z. So I'm all about fixing the incentives and making sure the incentives align to outcomes that benefit the people. Because once you solve that problem, the people closest to the problem, the boots on the ground, they tend to figure out the details. Like we can't just pretend like we know every single scenario and how to solve every single problem, up at the federal level. But you set the right incentives, and of course, this is why we track things to make sure it's correct, and we make sure those incentives are aligned to the desired outcomes. And trust me, the details get worked out.
yeah. And I know kind of I guess part of that stewardship you on your site you mentioned that the federal budget and the outrageous national debt and the deficit, and so that's a huge aspect too that kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. Not a problem solving enterprise, right? There's no incentives to fix it. They don't, it's a broken system where it probably can't be fixed with kind of the structures that we have right now.
Yeah, I'll
And I
just say
also
real
would,
quick on the
yeah,
debt. I think this is a very important point. It is this like it's almost like this imaginary number. We have so much going on in our lives. We have so much chaos going on in our government that we tend to forget about it, and we don't want to talk about it. And when we hear people talk about the debt, we immediately think oh, you just want to cut spending and you just want to cut taxes for the rich, or like it immediately goes to a negative thought. But I made this one of my three core pillars because I want this to be our Sputnik moment, so to speak. We are paying $1 trillion a year on interest alone,
yeah,
and that is expected to double over the next decade. I'm also a fan of history, and you look historically how governments have addressed this. They try to address this by increasing taxes, cutting spending, and rampant inflation. All of this leads to more and more civil unrest. And we're already seeing this in our society. This is what I mean. Like the signs and the trend lines are not in the right direction.
right.
We're seeing mass protests. We're seeing riots. We're seeing assassination attempts. It's like we need to change the direction that our country is going because this is not good. So it is a very important thing to me. And the way we solve this is to make sure our economy is growing faster than the debt. That reduces the debt to GDP ratio. That's why I'm very much focused on having a plan to more invest in America to generate more jobs, more tax base that gives us that debt to GDP ratio to bring dramatically down.
Right. Well, we definitely need more independent. We don't even need that many. You only need a handful really in
Exactly.
Congress to have this huge effect. Because if they can't really get a majority, then they have to appeal to the reasonable common sense independents. So that brings them more towards the middle and will bring them more towards solutions rather than always playing the partisan game. So, right,
Yeah,
solutions
if
over
neither
special
party,
interests, people over parties.
100%, absolutely agree. Yeah, if neither party has the majority, then guess what? They're forced to compromise. They're
Yeah.
forced to actually come together to get anything done. Because right now it's I'm part of this party, you're part of that party, I'm not going to work with you. Or the president is not part of my party, therefore I'm trying to block everything that he does. Or the president is a part of my party, and therefore I'm going to rubber stamp everything he does. It's like, no, you are a member of Congress. You're supposed to hold every single president accountable to make sure they are doing their job, and you need to be doing your job, which means passing legislation that is to the benefit of the people. Like Congress forgets they are representatives of the people. We've seen to totally lose that thought. And George Washington, on his way out the door, warned us about the political parties,
Yeah.
usurping the power of the people. And sadly, that's the reality we live in right now. And so this is also part of the messaging that I'm including and telling to people is like, this is not working. We need to break this duopoly. And the only way to do that is to get, like you said, a handful of independents in there, force compromise, and actually get things done.
Absolutely. So people can look you up at jamesforwashington.com, and I'll put that in the description. James, thank you so much for being on. Appreciate it.
And just real quick, also on my website, James for Washington, that's FOR, not the number. I have links to all my socials. I have a number of videos. Invite people to check out. Appreciate the follow, appreciate the share. Even if you're not in my district, this really helps just bring more
Oh, yeah.
attention
Yeah.
to my campaign. Like I said, August 4th is the big date. If you know anybody who is in the district, this is me speaking to the viewers. And first off, thank you very much for sticking with us for this long. If you know anyone who lives in the Eastern Seattle area, I appreciate you just letting them know about me. Thank
Yeah.
you for the support. Thank you for the opportunity to speak my case. I really appreciate these long form discussions. I don't hate's a strong word. I dislike these debates are like, okay, you have 30 seconds, solve immigration. It's just
Yeah.
like,
Right.
okay, can we talk about this? This is not like a black or white issue, or it's not a
Yeah.
binary issue. There's
Talking
nuance to
points.
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I fear, I know our politics have descended into that, where it's just who can get the most clicks, who can get the most likes, who can get the most attention, who can say the most outrageous things, and this is what is just fueling this broken system. So I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for giving me a chance to make my case, and thanks.
Thanks.